A second-degree murder charge against a Milton man who allegedly shot an armed intruder inside his home last winter has been withdrawn. CP24 crime analyst Steve Ryan joins us live now to break down this decision. Steve?
Yeah, Lindsay, last February, Milton police responded to what they called a home invasion, a targeted home invasion to an address in Milton. It was alleged that 4 suspects entered the home. At least one of those suspects was accused or believed to have had a firearm with him. The 22-year-old occupant in that home was a licensed gun owner. He retrieved his gun, fired one shot, killing one of the suspects instantly, and he was charged with second-degree murder. That charge was withdrawn by the Crown Attorney today. Now, joining me to discuss this further is Joseph Newberger, who is a criminal defense lawyer. Joseph, thank you for your time, sir.
Always a pleasure.
What do you make of the decision?
Well, I think the Crown came to their senses. I don't think they had a chance of getting 12 people in a jury to convict this gentleman of second-degree murder in circumstances where he and his mother were at extreme risk of serious bodily harm or death. This was clearly a self-defense case, which would have been made out in front of a jury. So I think the Crown finally did the right thing and withdrew the charge.
Now, we certainly don't have a stand your ground law here in Canada like they do, say, in Florida. But what would you say to people who might think that we do? What is required before somebody can take or use such force?
Yeah, Steve, that's a great point, because in the United States, in several jurisdictions, like you said, Florida, there's the castle doctrine. So if somebody enters your home and they're an intruder and you perceive that there is a threat to you and your family, you're allowed to use lethal force. And you have no requirement to retreat from those circumstances. That's not the case in Canada. We have self-defense laws. So there are requirements on a person to try and seek alternative routes to protect themselves and others. You can't simply just resort to lethal force. You have to be careful about the moment that you choose to act that way. So it's very difficult in very stressful situations when you're at risk to do that sort of minute calculation. But I'd say to anybody, this is not a precedent if you're a licensed gun owner and somebody intrudes your house to just pull a firearm. You have to be very careful about those circumstances, and each case stands on its own.
You make a great point. That's a great segue into my next question. It's reported that this 22-year-old fired one shot in defense. Do you think that would have mattered had he emptied, let's say, an entire Glock into the suspects as opposed to firing one shot? Do you think that played a role in the Crown's decision?
Absolutely, Steve. So this was one shot that happened to be the shot that killed the individual. So, had he fired off a number of rounds, you certainly could, draw an argument or an inference that, in fact, he intended to kill all the individuals. And sometimes you can make an argument that if there's one shot, it was to warn or maim, not necessarily kill. It's a measured response, possibly, in those extreme circumstances. But again, there can be other circumstances where where the person who's defending their family may have to discharge more than one bullet in order to protect themselves. But I think you're right, Steve. This was one shot, and I think that did factor into the overall consideration by the Crown Attorney.
And lastly, very quickly, if somebody's breaking into your house, does there need to be more than just somebody breaking into your house? Does there have to be some sort of threat to one's life or serious bodily harm? Or can you take that same step to defend, say, a stolen car, hypothetically?
Yeah, so good point. Again, this is about your residence. So I would say there's a definite difference than if somebody's trying to steal some property. Let's say somebody's sneaking in your garage or your driveway and trying to steal the vehicle. That's certainly not circumstances where in defense of property, you're allowed to use lethal force. That would be excessive force. If somebody has now entered in your house, there's more than one individual. You have somebody who's with you who's also like a child, or your mother who's more elderly and more vulnerable, and you have a sense of fear because of the way they're coming in and the time of night. So let's say, I think this was at 5 in the morning. Those may be sufficient circumstances to act. But all of those are careful sort of considerations you have to make when acting. So again, it can't be just simply defense of property. It's inside the home in circumstances where what comes to you is that you are at imminent risk of bodily harm or death. And that is the requirement then for you to act.
Always enjoy your conversations. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Steve. Pleasure.
It's Joseph Newberger. He's a criminal defense attorney here in the Greater Toronto area. Lindsay, I'll send it back to you.
Very interesting conversation. Okay, that's CP24 Steve Ryan. Thanks, Steve.